Right. Well, I'm glad to be with you today. I miss being there just to hit you and, give you a bad time, but here we are. So I'm very glad to be with you today. And we're looking at we started to go through the Proverbs of Solomon. And last time when we met, we looked at Proverbs chapter 1. And the last verse we ended with is verse 8. And it says, "Hear, my son, your father's instructions, and do not forsake your mother's teaching." And Solomon, we understand in the writing of the Proverbs, Solomon was addressing his son in the same manner and with the same message that God addressed him and his dad, King David. Solomon was given warnings to his son concerning the negative influences in life. He said, "You only have one life, but live it carefully. Live it with wisdom." And his first amount of advice to here, he gave him two statements. One, if you've got your Bible, by the way, turn to Proverbs 1. So, because you might want to follow along with me in this. I'm going to stay pretty close to the text today. But Proverbs chapter 1 and beginning in verse 10. I just read verse 8 to you about listen to your dad and don't forsake your mom. They've taught you well, and remember what the things they've taught you. It just as you're looking for the passage, if you don't have it there, but I just remember as a kid, I came to faith in junior high, and I just remember sometime during my high school days, I was all upset about something and I was feisty and I don't know, I was out of sorts, I guess. But anyway, my mom grabbed me by the arm and said, "Eddie, you need to go get away with the Lord. You need to talk to him about all this stuff." And I'm going, whoa. I mean, Mom never talked to me like that. And I just, good grief, that was 70 years ago. Well, not quite, 65, but nonetheless, a long time ago. But I still remember that time when my mom got my attention and said, "You need to go talk to God about the stuff you're dealing with." And that sort of marked me in life. When things have gotten tough, I've found a place alone just to, in a sense, pour out my heart to the Lord, to talk to him about the things I didn't like, things I didn't like about him, things I didn't like that were going on in my life. But I found in just going to God and just talking to him that a lot of things sorted out in my head, and it was helpful. But this was advice that Solomon was giving to his son. Two things he said. In verse 10, he said, "My son, if sinners entice you, do not consent." And then if you go down to verse 15, this is the second piece of advice that he gave. He said, "My son, do not walk in the way with them," that is, in the way with sinners. "Keep your feet from their path." So he gave two comments of advice to his son and said, be careful how you live and who you associate with, because it affects your life. I just remember somebody in my teen years had made a statement in a talk of some kind. She said, "If you spend your time in the garbage can, you're going to smell like garbage." He said, so be careful who you spend time with, because it's going to be long before you start acting and looking like them. We're social creatures and we tend to do that. But Solomon was concerned about his son. And I think there are many influences in life that can be attractive to us. Easy money. I said, "Hey, do you want to make a quick buck?" Yeah, just a little bit of money, that's fine. A carefree life. I've never really been drawn to responsibility. I'd rather be able to choose what I want to do and when I want to do it. But a carefree life is attractive. And another thing is a ladder to success and power. If you start down this path, I can put you in a good place. We'll move you from server to manager to owner. And then you'll have the corporate president of a chain of, just there's a path that can come to us that sounds pretty good because we like the idea of success. We like the idea of power. But then we like the idea of respect and having influence. And when those things are offered to us, there are times when we will compromise what we value in our life for what we might achieve if we follow a path. And it isn't long been life before we ultimately learn that most of the things that we have to give up, what's important to us in life, our integrity for one, that ultimately that's destructive to us. Anything that is gained through deceit, compromise, selling out one's integrity, self-respect, will always be destructive. And in the passage here in verse 11, we find that there's Solomon describes what he means by sinners. He told his son, if sinners entice you. So what is the sinners he's talking about? Well, in verse 11, he begins to describe them. And it's basically a ruthless gang of people. And in verse 11, it says, if they say, and that's the sinners he's speaking of, if they say, come with us, let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent without cause. Let us swallow them alive like Sheol, or the place of death, even whole as those who go down to the pit or hell. We will find all kinds of precious wealth, and we will fill our house with spoil. It's basically just saying, come with us, and we're going to go steal and make a lot of, we're going to gain a lot, and we'll be wealthy and powerful. We'll be cool. And then he said, verse 14, throw in your lot with us. We shall all have one purse. We'll all be wealthy. Well, come join us and get rich quick and easy by taking it from other people. Doesn't sound like probably a very long-term process that will be productive. The means that they intended to accomplish this, as it was described here, is ruthless, brutal, and murderous. Let us lie in wait for blood. Let us ambush the innocent. We'll swallow them alive like death. They called out in Solomon's statement to his son. It says, they, the sinners, call out, come with us. And Solomon's plea was, don't go with them. The end of all their actions is known to all, their self-destruction. In verse 15, he says, my son, do not walk in the way with them. Keep your feet from their path. Don't spend time with them. Don't hang out. Verse 16, for their feet run to evil and they hasten to shed blood. Indeed, it is useless to spread the baited net in the sight of any bird. I thought that's kind of a strange statement in the middle of his comments here. I go, it's an analogy, it doesn't make sense if you want to catch a bird, that you would lay out a net and you'd put some kind of food in it or some kind of bait in it that would attract the bird, and then you catch the bird in the net. But the bird's sitting in the branch watching you do this. Well, the bird's not going to go down there because he sees it's a trap. And you say, well, any bird's got enough sense to do that. But his point in the analogy is that people who run the path of the people that Solomon's warning his son about, those who were regarded sinners in this, the picture of that is that they're laying traps for people, but actually it's going to be a trap for them in their own life. If you go down a path of destruction, it will destroy you. And so that's the analogy, the thought, and that's clear in the next verse. In verse 18, it says, but they, the sinner, lie in wait for their own blood. They think they're there waiting for the blood of somebody else and to steal from them. But he's saying it's actually them who's going to shed their own blood because of the trap. They ambush their own lives. So are the ways with everyone who gains by violence. It takes away the life of its possessors. And so Solomon's, is laying out some concern for his son that he be careful about who he associates with because of the influences that would be in his life in the end that could be destructive to him. And he wanted to protect his son from that. So he gives him this advice. And I said, we could assume this advice was given to Solomon by God. We know from the first time we gathered that God asked Solomon, what do you want from me? And Solomon asked for wisdom. And God said, I will give you that wisdom more than any man before you or any man that follows you. And so the wisdom we have here is a picture for us of how God sees us and what God warns us about. So although in the text it's Solomon writing to his son, it's God's advice to us. And I wrote a comment here in my notes, says, I'm guessing that none of you who regularly come to the English service would even be tempted to follow the group described by Solomon. I have a hard time picturing any of you running in a gang. But it wouldn't surprise me that you or your friends have or are being tempted by others to compromise your personal values to get something you want. I mean, these temptations face all of us. It could be temptation to fulfill pleasures that you want in your life, something that's yours and you know is not appropriate. It's not healthy. It's not right. It would not honor your parents. You know these things, but you want it and you're going to get it. And I said, that's a temptation. It's not a gang you follow, but it's just as destructive. Another is possessions. I want a lot of money. No, I don't want a lot of money. I want enough money to drive the car I want to drive. I want enough money that I can do whatever I want to do. I don't want to be in want. The only thing I want is what I want. And I want to be able to get it. And so sometimes there are situations in which an opportunity to make money is not legal or not ethical, not moral. And you know that, but it's a way to make money and you're going to make money with it. I said the temptation is there. And another is the temptation of prestige. I really want to be somebody. Just a second. And no, I'm not sick. I want to remember something here, that we all have an enemy of our soul who constantly tries to attract us through deception to the ultimate destruction of us. Our soul, that innermost being, that's who I am as a person. And the enemy has names. He's called Lucifer, Satan, devil, evil one, angel of light, great deceiver, father of lies. And what I want to say is, don't listen to his voice or follow him. The end of his plans are all destruction for you. All right.
Yep. I'll get you some water.
I got a tickle in my throat here. I don't know why I'm getting that, but there it is. But the end of Satan's plans for us are destruction. And I remind you a verse that I memorized as a high school kid, 1 Corinthians 10:13. It's been helpful to me. No temptation has overtaken you, but such as is common to man. And God is faithful, will not allow you to be tempted above what you are able, but will, with the temptation, provide the way of escape also, so that you will be able to endure it. Okay, I'm having a hard time communicating here, but we're good. We're going to make it. So my point in this subject, in the verse that I memorized, is just simply this, that everybody's tempted. But God tells us in his word, he will not allow any temptation to come to us that we can't handle. There's always a way out. We can choose to avoid or run from or dismiss or some kind of action on our part that will keep us from giving into that temptation. We have an out. And often the difficulty is we don't want out. The temptation is attractive to us. But there's always a cost. There's a price to pay. But just know that God is able to meet us in all those situations. He says he'll give us a way out. And it says he'll provide a way of escape so that you will be able to endure it. And the whole thought of enduring is just that it is sometimes difficult to avoid temptation. You have to endure something that's difficult in order to pass by the temptation. All I can tell you is that it's the better route to take. There's less pain in missing the temptation than there isn't pain in giving into it. Well, our text today gives us two warnings. Do not consent to the invitation to do evil or to join those who do evil, and don't walk with them. So careful in who you choose to be with, to spend your time with. And then what follows this description of wicked people and the wicked ways and ultimate destruction of them is a conversation with wisdom. And wisdom in this text is a woman who represents the whole of all wise thought from God. She is the personification of wisdom speaking to everyone. So it's like wisdom we know is a content of thoughts, ideas, wisdom that could provide counsel for us. That's wisdom. But in the story that follows here in our text, wisdom is a person, a woman, and wisdom speaks out to people. And that's just to help us to understand the idea of wisdom. And the word that's used here, wisdom, shouts in the street. It says in verse 20, wisdom, this personification woman, is a plural noun. So it's not just wisdom as a single thought, but it's the collection of all wisdom, is what's implied in the Hebrew there with a plural form. So wisdom in verse 20, wisdom shouts in the street. She lifts her voice in the square. At the head of noisy streets, she cries out. At the entrance of the gates in the city, she utters her sayings. It's in all the public places that she's speaking. No, it's in the street. It's in the public square. It's among all the noise that's out in the street. It's at the entrance of the city. So all the places where people would gather, the public places, that's where wisdom is present. Wisdom is not cloistered in some circle of learned people or only in institutions of higher learning. Wisdom is common and available to all of us. That's the point. And what is the counsel that wisdom shouts to all? So we'll look on at what did wisdom shout in the streets? In verse 22, how long, O naive ones, will you love being simple-minded? And scoffers delight themselves in scoffing, and fools hate knowledge. I'm going, where's the wisdom in that? But she's addressing an audience. Wisdom is speaking to those who are simple-minded, scoffers, and fools. The simple-minded, the one who is naive, who says, all things are good and beautiful, and proud of the simplicity of my thinking and my life. Naive, the simple-minded, or the scoffer, the sarcastic, the cynical, the defiant one. And the fool, the arrogant, the morally bankrupt, the ignorant. So she's stated her audience. Wisdom speaks to those who pay no attention. And I picked up a bit of wisdom in life, most of it from the Bible, and just the teaching that I've gained there. But one thing is clear. For every action, there is a consequence. For good or for bad. Everything I do is going to produce something good. It's going to produce something bad. Nothing's neutral. And wisdom yelled it in the streets. And to the wise who acknowledge God, she says, turn to my reproof, to my correction. Behold, I will pour out my spirit on you, and I will make my words known to you. So the positive consequence of listening to wisdom and acting on what wisdom says is that wisdom will pour out the Spirit of God upon us. And wisdom in this situation is almost equated to the presence of God. God is wisdom, and God will pour out his Spirit on you, and he'll make his words known to you. I don't know how many people I've talked to in life, many, who've just said, I've opened the Bible and I've tried reading it and I just don't understand it at all. It just doesn't make any sense to me at all. And I said, it's because their heart's in the wrong place. If they opened a book to read, to get to know who is God and what is God like and what does he have to say to me, then I gain understanding. But if I see it as a religious book, an ancient history or something, it's empty words. It doesn't mean anything to me because the Bible, remember, is alive. The Spirit of God prompted the people who wrote the Bible, and it's the Spirit of God who gives us understanding as we read it. And he says, if you're responsive to me, hey, you simpleton, hey, you scoffer, hey, you fool, listen up, turn from your way. And my Spirit will come upon you, be upon you, and I'll give you understanding of my words. That's the positive thing that comes out of the consequence of listening to wisdom. Well, also says here, in contrast to those who listen, it goes on in verse 24 to say, to those who refuse God's counsel, what happens? It says in verse 24, because I called and you refused, I stretched out my hand and no one paid attention, and you neglected all my counsel and did not want my reproof, my correction. Because of these things, I will also laugh at your calamity. I will mock when your dread comes. When your dread comes like a storm and your calamity comes like a whirlwind, when distress and anguish come upon you. Then they will call on me, but I will not answer. They will seek me diligently, but they will not find me, because they hated knowledge and did not choose to fear the fear of the Lord. They would not accept my counsel. They spurned all my reproof. So they shall eat of the fruit of their way and be satiated with their own devices. For the waywardness of the naive will kill them, and the complacency of fools will destroy them. Now, that doesn't sound like a very pretty picture. But wisdom and calling out says, listen up, and my Spirit will be with you and grant you more wisdom and more understanding. Refuse my wisdom, hide in your pride, walk out in arrogance, and when destruction comes to you, there will be no help. And I'm going, that sounds pretty final. And I said, I don't want to find myself in that place. And I can say most of my life, ultimately, in any given situation, when I found myself rebellious, when I found myself falling in fear or pride or any of those destructive things, that when I saw it and I turned to God, I found forgiveness, I found mercy, I found grace, I found help. I found a relationship with God restored rather than being severed. So it's been important to me to walk life with a posture of repentance. God, you know what I'm bent to do and to be. You know what I tend to be like. And I remember reading in Hebrews chapter 4 that Jesus was tempted in every way that we are, yet without sin. He understands our weaknesses. And there in verse 16 in Hebrews 4, it says, therefore, because he knows he's been tempted, he knows our weaknesses, therefore, come boldly before the throne of God to receive grace and mercy to help in times of need. So he welcomes us. There's a recourse on our life if we're responsive. And if we're not, we end up like the person described here in verses 24 through 32. They shall eat the fruit of their own way and be satiated with their own devices, for the waywardness will kill them. So the consequences of refusing the wisdom of God's counsel are serious and final. Avoid the negative consequences by making appropriate responses. An appropriate response to wisdom looks like one who listens to their father and doesn't forsake their mother's teaching. I'm going to review the text with you in this context. What's an appropriate response to wisdom? Listen to your mom and dad and what they've been saying to you. And I ask the question, do you? Are you? An appropriate response to wisdom does not consent to the lure of sinners, unbelievers bent on their own path of destruction. And so I ask, have you yielded your life to the path of those who are headed away from God? An appropriate response to wisdom does not walk in the way of sinners. Where do you hang out? You spend a time with fellow believers that can encourage you in your faith and hold you accountable, can be strength to you in your life. Find some brothers, some sisters who walk with God, and you can be that encouragement and strength to each other. An appropriate response to wisdom is to listen and accept counsel. Listen to the wise counsel. Don't quickly dismiss it. Weigh it in your life. Weigh consequences. An appropriate response to wisdom is to quickly acknowledge the error of your way, repent, and follow wisdom's counsel. These are all things reflected in the passage we've just read. I would say remember God's words to King David, Solomon's dad. It's recorded in Psalm 111 in verse 10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And the fear of the Lord is a reverence, an awe. It's present with God. In his presence, there is an awe, there's a respect, there's a worship. And that kind of relationship with God is the beginning of wisdom. Wisdom doesn't begin with your own arrogance. It begins with God's counsel. So I say in light of what Solomon is saying here to his son, acknowledge God, come in humility and faith, pursue him with all your heart, and learn wisdom. Accumulate. Keep a journal. Keep track of the things that God is teaching you. Write your thoughts about what you read in the Bible. Write your thoughts about life and your conversations with God. A journal is a good thing to do. I don't much for writing in a book. I kept 3x5 cards, and I had several index card boxes full of my journal, my notes to God and to myself during my high school days. I've looked for them, but they're among my 60 boxes somewhere out in the garage. But someday I'll find them, or maybe my kids will find them. I don't know. But acknowledge God, come in humility and faith, and pursue him with all your heart and learn wisdom. And in the text we're reading, wisdom concluded her message by saying this in verse 33. He who listens to me shall live securely and will be at ease from the dread of evil. Listen to wisdom. Listen to wisdom. And you'll be secure and live at ease in the face of all kinds of evil. I look at the day in which we're living right now. It's crazy. Nothing like this in human history that I can recall from anything I've ever read or ever experienced. The whole world focused on one thing. But the wisdom that guards my heart in these days is that there isn't anything God doesn't know. He's fully aware of what's going on in our world right now. He's fully aware of what's going on in everybody's heart. He even knows the intentions of our heart. Everybody. Almost 8 billion people on this globe. And that just blows my head. There's no way. I can't even grasp that idea. But that's what the word teaches. And that's what I've been experiencing in my life, that there isn't anything that God doesn't seem to know and doesn't have an answer to and isn't engaged in. But I find sanity in these days in the fact that God knows, God cares, and God's in control for a good outcome. He is love. And we are his. And we're his through faith in his son, Jesus. While I've been studying, reading Proverbs and thinking about things I want to share with you from it, I was having a conversation with somebody else, and we were in another text in the New Testament. And I was just amazed at the parallel of what I've just read here from Proverbs 1 and what Paul had to say to the believers in Ephesus. Austin read this at the beginning, and I want to read it again to you now in the context of what you've just heard. Paul said to the Ephesians, "Let no one deceive you with empty words. For because of these things, the wrath of God comes upon the sons of disobedience. Therefore, do not be partakers with them. For you were formerly darkness, but now you are light in the Lord. Walk as children of light. For the fruit of the light consists in all goodness and righteousness and truth, trying to learn what is pleasing to the Lord." It's a commitment of a life that just says, God, what do you want from me? What can I do that honors you, that pleases you? Because I know that'll be the best things for me. It goes on, do not participate in the unfruitful deeds of darkness, but instead even expose them, for it is disgraceful even to speak of the things which are done by them in secret. But all things become visible when they are exposed to the light. For everything that becomes visible is light. For this reason it says, "Awake, sleeper, arise from the dead, and Christ will shine on you." Be responsive to him. Wake up. Take responsibility for your life and your decisions and the things that you do and say, and take that responsibility before God. That passage ends with this, "Therefore, be careful how you walk, not as unwise men, but as wise, making the most of your time, because the days are evil. So then do not be foolish, but understand what the will of the Lord is." These are the words of Paul to the believers in the city of Ephesus. They're found in Ephesians chapter 5, verses 6 through 17. And they parallel the counsel that Solomon gave to his son, recorded there in Proverbs chapter 1. And it wouldn't surprise me at all if Paul wasn't even thinking about that when he wrote this to him. He found that same passage, those ideas in Proverbs 1. And what is the will of God that we can understand? Our relationship with God begins with acknowledging that God is, and that we are primarily driven by self-will and refuse and neglect his call to trust him. When we come humbly expressing faith that Jesus died, taking upon himself all the judgment we deserve, this heartfelt prayer results in a new spiritual birth into the family of God, a relationship now and for eternity. There's wisdom and there's wise counsel. And God just didn't stay in his heavens. It said Jesus, even though he was equal with God in Philippians chapter 2. Jesus, even though he was equal with God, did not regard his relationship His position is something to hang on to, the grasp. But he opened his hand. He opened his life. And he took on the form of his own creation, of mankind. And he lived out his life in humility and service. And the scripture says, let this same mind be in you. Don't stand in arrogance, but open your life and your heart and offer it as a servant, as sacrifice. And for us, Jesus, in doing that, offered his life and sacrifice on the cross, taking all the judgment that could come upon him, upon us, taking all that upon himself on the cross. And a righteous Father judged all of that disobedience, rebellion, pride, arrogance that's in us. God judged all that in his son Jesus, and Jesus died in our place. And the scriptures teach us that when we embrace that, acknowledge our need and acknowledge that Jesus' death was for us, that we are then granted the right to be called the children of God. We're his family. And when the Father of the book speaks to us, it's the Father's advice, the Heavenly Father's advice to us, who knows all things and cares the utmost about us. Somewhere in this, Solomon got the picture. He wanted his son to know what he knew. Solomon, if you keep following his life, did a lot of things that were arrogant, a lot of things that were pride. He did a lot of things that were destructive to him. He ultimately lost the kingdom. But he knew a better way. And he shared it with his son. And would that we could take this good advice and live by it and experience the good things, the promises of God. So that's my thoughts for you for today. And we'll go into chapter 2. You might, if you want, you get an opportunity, take a read in chapters 2 through 4, 2, 3, and 4 for the next time we get together. Give you a little background as to some of the things I might be sharing with you. But glad to be with you today. Wish we could go out and have coffee or go have lunch together. Go have some sashimi or something, I don't know. Not going to happen yet, but someday soon. Take care.